Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are around the world, and welcome back to Into the Deck. I am Manuel, your host as usual, and this time my guest is the one and only Aleks Dakic.
Hello,
welcome
everybody.
Back.
Glad to be here again.
Fantastic. I'm very happy you could join me again here because we can talk about Mono-Red Prowess in a modern deck for the first time on Into the Deck. So something a little bit new. Yeah, we talked about this before. I mean, this deck, we covered it with a few videos on Sideboard Files. And now it's the first time we talk about it on Into the Deck, and we can just talk about other stuff that usually we don't really cover in Sideboard Files. Mm-hmm. So since you're here, let's talk about Mono-Red Prowess and let's have a look at your list. This is what you're playing at the moment. Tell me about your choices, your tuning process, all that kind of stuff.
So there's nothing really like exciting, outstanding right now. All the lists are pretty much, stock. Just like maybe two numbers are being different in all those kind of lists. But I chose to go for 3 copies of Kiln Fiend instead of 2 copies, just because of the fact that I really like the card to have it in turn 2 as often as possible because it raises so good. It's such a huge threat for the opponent. And, in the current meta, I would say decks are really fast. Have gone really fast. Amulet Titan, and some other combo decks that are currently running around, and Kiln just helps racing those decks, And I cut the 4th Battling Reveler just because of the reason that I found myself having Revelers too often stuck in my hand. I wanted to decrease the chance of like having 2 Revelers stuck in my hand. When I cast one, you got to discard a second one. I mean, that's not like too terrible. It happens. It's going to happen with 3 copies as well. But I wanted to kind of decrease the chance of this happening, and also found myself having Revelers too often in my starting hands, which is not too bad. It's not like 7-1 a hand, but I would love to have the Reveler drawn instead of having it in my opening hand. But I mean, as I said, it's not too bad having it in your starting hand, because then you have a game plan and going for the Reveler, playing your spells as soon as possible, just playing a Lava Spike on turn 1, for example, if you don't have a 1-drop, and build towards the Reveler. So it's not too bad having 1 in the starting hand. But I wanted to kind of swap those two numbers a bit and play 3 Kiln Fiend instead of 2, and play 3 Revelers instead of 4. So that's one of the changes. And I cut the Wallet's Fury for now, and decided to go for the full playset of Burst Lightnings, just because it just increases the amount of burst I can deal to my opponent, especially with Kiln Fiend. There's not much more behind it, and also Burst Lightning is just great card to against any sort of small creature decks. So I went for that. And the reason behind Burst Lightning, it doesn't really matter which shock effect you play, because they're all the same. In the end, they're all shock effects. But I, as with the earlier lists, I prefer the instant speed nature of Burst Lightning. And sometimes I realized that happened to me quite a few times, that the kicker ability also comes in quite handy, and more often than you might think.
So the kicker ability is actually something that plays a role now. In this current meta, it's worth actually going for Burst Lightning, also because of that.
Yeah, exactly. I had moments where my opponent was on, 4 is not the best number for your opponent's life total, because Lightning Bolt, Lava Spike doesn't end the game, but the Burst Lightning, if you have enough mana, does, and that's just sometimes really good.
All right. Shall we start talking about tips that you can give actually to help players to optimize their play and get better at playing Mono-Red Prowess? So what will be your advice?
So my advice would be for beginners is to just don't care too much about your opponent's plan, I mean. Not really about the life total. Of course, you care about the life total, but not really about the plan they're doing, trying to resolve, but just try to pay more attention to your own game plan, to create your board state, and to try to win as fast as possible. Try to focus first on that, and then with time and practice, other things will come as well. and try to sequence your spells and creatures such as that you increase the chance of winning as soon as possible. For example, try to first deploy your creatures, turn 1 your Swift Spear or Soulscar Mage, and turn 2 your Kiln Fiend or some other 1-drop, and then turn 3 usually you try to go off and try to go all in.
So it's important to remember that this is an aggro deck. So you want to close the game as fast as possible.
Yes.
So you have to stick to that plan.
And sequencing is very, very important.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I mean, sequencing your turns, for instance, like setting up your game. Is there like an ideal sequence that you try to, let's say, execute, or depends a little bit on what you have in your starting hand? Well, the starting hand actually is pretty important, so maybe we should talk about that first. So what would you like to see in your starting hand?
So what I would love to see every time I draw my starting hand is a 1-drop, especially Soulscar Mage, and maybe 1 to interact with spells, Burst Lightnings, Lava Darts, Lightning Bolts, maybe light up the stage, draw you more cards, and 2 lands. That would be the perfect hand, I would say so. And also a Kiln Fiend, of course.
You have to close the game super
second
fast.
threat, yes.
All right, so let's say that you have this hand, that you describe, this type of hand. So how do you play the first turns?
So first turn you play your Soulscar Mage, and then on the second turn I would say just play your Kiln Fiend, and on the third turn you win the game. Okay. Simple as that.
But it's important actually. For instance, there is this interesting thing in the playing. You have Swift Spear, for instance, and Soulscar Mage, and the best play that you can do is actually playing Soulscar Mage first and then the Swift Spear attack with both, for instance. This is this kind of sequencing that you were talking about when you were saying sequence your turn and set up your game.
Exactly. Try to play your threats first that don't have haste. So that would be like a good advice. Just first play your Soulscar Mage, then in turn 2 you can play your Swift Spear, then maybe start the combat off. I mean, start the main phase off with a Lava Spike after the Swift Spear resolved, and then you just go in for some damage, And the next turn you can do maybe some neat things like Lava Dart, light up a stage, and stuff like that, and try to finish the game as fast as possible. But every time, first start off with the creatures that don't have haste, because that maximizes your damage output.
All right. Light up the stage. You just mentioned it. Do you want to play it as soon as possible, or do you want to hold it back a little bit and play it when you're out of gas to see if you can find more threats or direct damage? How do you manage it?
It depends. When you look at your hand and or you calculate as such that it won't end the game in time, turn 3 or turn 4, you might want to dig deeper and try to find maybe more threats or more spells you can deploy next turn in order to hopefully then finish your game off. So it always depends. Maybe against grindy decks, run mid-range control, maybe you want to deploy your light up the stage as soon as possible to just play more threats, to try to play more threats on your board and to pressure your opponent. But it always depends on this kind of situation,
Can you make an example of different situations and different choices that you would do?
I guess what I prefer to do is, for example, you have in your hand a Crash Through, a Light Up a Stage, a Lava Dart. And what I would do is, if I don't have a second 1-drop, I play my 1-drop on the first turn. And then on the second turn, I usually go for the Lava Dart, Light Up the Stage. To see more cards and to know, okay, what am I going to do next turn, for example. Or usually what you can also do is, instead of, for example, if you have on turn 2, you have Soulscar Mage on the battlefield, you play a Swift Spear, then you can either decide to Lava Spike your opponent, for example, or just Lava Dart, or you could just attack, deal 2 damage without any Prowess triggers, and then cast Light Up the Stage to see more cards and to perhaps go for the kill next turn. Maybe you find a Mono-Morphose or Lava Dart, and then you can just maximize your damage output that much.
All right, crystal clear. You know they like to say that, and
Yes.
it really is. Okay, common mistakes Of course, because beginners make mistakes, everybody makes mistakes, even pros make mistakes, but beginners are more likely to make mistakes. So what are the mistakes that you should avoid when you start playing this deck?
Even Joshua Bausch does mistakes.
Yes. We saw it in the video, yeah. Absolutely. But as we said, all human. So anyway,
Of course.
go on with the mistakes that you should avoid.
So I think the biggest mistake is miscalculating. That happened to me so often. When I thought I had him, my opponent, and then I miscalculated, and then I just missed lethal or something, or I could have had lethal, but I missequenced my spells. That can happen. Miscalculating is normal. Don't think too much about it, but always keep in mind, okay, how much damage can I pull off this turn? So that happens quite often.
So every turn you check how much damage you have on the battlefield and counting your cards, how much damage you can actually output, let's say.
Yeah, starting with, I
Okay.
think, turn 3, you should maybe try to calculate, okay, how big is my damage output this turn, next turn. On turn 2, you're not going to do as much damage because by then you're going to have only one creature in play, hopefully, that can attack. But yeah.
All right. More mistakes?
Overthinking your turns, for example. I found myself, I'm an overthinker myself. So I speak with experience. So no, the thing is, usually I find myself just overthinking my turns, when I want to go for lethal, for example, or just want to execute my plan, my turn, and then I'm like, okay, what could he have that could go wrong? And then, okay, but then I could do this, but what if he has this? What if my opponent has that? And then it takes a while, and then you maybe do play you don't really like, and you're not really satisfied with your turn, and then maybe you even do a misplay. So don't overthink your turns. Try to learn the hard way, and just go for it. And then with practice and games and time, you will get a feeling for all those things. When should I go in all in? Does my opponent have the removal to kind of destroy my game plan, destroy this turn? So don't overthink too much.
Oh, that's an interesting point, actually, when you were mentioning going all in or not. So can you make an example of a situation in which you actually should hold back?
So I tend to hold back. So as I said, learn the hard way. You'll get a feeling for that. But I tend to hold back in matchups that where my opponent have a lot of ways to disrupt my creatures, to destroy my creatures. For example, maybe a good example would be Death Shadow. I had a funny game where I actually went all in because I just wanted to see if he has it, but it was the wrong choice. He didn't have it, but it was still I shouldn't have done it. So I went all in on the Soulscar Mage, sacrificed all my mountains except maybe one. I'm not sure. Played all my Lava Darts, flashed back them, and got him down to I think 2 or 1, I believe. But if he would have had a fatal push or something, I would have been pretty much a lossless game. So I usually tend to go a little bit slower against those kind of matchups where they have a lot of ways to just interact with your creatures.
Okay, so when they're very interactive, you want just to be cautious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with time and practice, as I said, you get a feeling for, and you can guess if your opponent has the removal, depending on how they maybe played their turn out, tap their mana and stuff like that. So you might get a sense of, okay, I think I can go all in now, and that's also a really good thing about Kiln Fiend. You don't have to spend too many resources to deal so much damage. Because just, for example, you play your Lava Dart, your Lava Spike, and your Metamorphose. That's just 3 spells you would normally cast anyway if you have creatures on the board. And Kiln Fiend just 3 spells, 4 spells, maybe 13 damage. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's a powerhouse, Kiln Fiend.
It's a powerhouse, yes.
Yeah, I love that creature. Any other common mistakes that come up to mind?
Yes, don't overboard. I used to overboard matchups. For example, there's a matchup I'm not sure which one it was. I think it was some sort of Sultai Uro Delirium deck. And I just wanted to slam all my Blood Moons and all my Leyline of the Voids in it because all those cards were kind of decent against this deck, but that would just be like too much. You know, you still have to follow your main game plan, which is killing your opponent with creatures, and more often than not, you should still focus on that. Even though sometimes the deck can take different roles, you know, sometimes it can be this kind of mono-red control deck where you just have a bunch of removal spells pointing at your opponent's creatures, try to keep the board clear until your own creatures get deployed, or for example, you can get very grindy against decks like Jund Midrange, where you keep hands that have a lot of card draw abilities, and where you want to just build towards a Reveler, build towards the late game, but don't take like the word mono-red control literally, because you're still winning the games by attacking with your creatures.
Sure. You're not really, this is not a deck that is built for controlling the game. This is a deck that is built actually for just being very aggressive and assault your opponent more or less. That's what it does.
You're also not a burn deck, so don't try to I'm just going to go for burn spells. You have to deploy your creatures and at least put some pressure early on, or deal chunks of damage first with your creatures, and then you can maybe finish them off of your burn spells.
Yes, you win on the battlefield. That's for sure.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, let's talk about Lava Dart, because Lava Dart, little thing, deals 1 damage, flashback. It seems like this little card, but it's actually quite a big card in this deck. So the flashback ability is very important, and it's also very important, of course, to keep track of how many Lava Darts you have in your graveyard. So do you have a specific method actually to do that?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
I caught you off guard with this one.
No, that's a cool question. I really like that. So I guess everybody has their own ways of maybe sorting their graveyard and keeping track of all those spells, which is also very good advice. And also common mistakes people do when playing this deck is keep track of your instant and sorceries in your graveyard, and especially Lava Darts, because just in case you draw a Reveler, then you're like, oh, dang it, I could have just played my Lava Spike or Lightning Bolt end of my opponent's turn, then I would be able to cast my Reveler. This happens. So always keep track and calculate, when can you play your Reveler, for example. So yeah, but Lava Darts especially, or what I do to keep track of those things is just I try to not put them on one pile, but try to, I guess, sort them a bit by non-relevant cards and relevant cards. Non-relevant cards being lands and creatures, and relevant cards being all sorceries and instants. And but as soon as I have enough instant sorceries to just cast a Reveler for 2, I usually just put all the graveyard cards in one pile. Maybe I learned to remember the amounts of Lava Darts, but then at this point I do not really care about how many instant sorceries I have in my graveyard. Then just have this pile of graveyard, and I can sort of remember my Lava Darts. But what you can also do is just put your Lava Darts on top of your graveyard. Of course, that also helps your opponent to keep track of it. But as I said, first try to focus on executing your own game plan, keeping track of your things, and don't care about what your opponent does. Or if he sees that you have a Lava Dart. More often than not, your opponent will ask anyway, do you have a Lava Dart in the graveyard? Or how many instant sorceries do you have in the graveyard?
Sure.
So it's going to happen nonetheless. But yeah, that's my tip.
So this is your method, but of course, each player can develop their own. I mean, it's totally fine as long as actually you achieve the goal, which is actually to keep track, because it's very important actually to know what's in there. You said before that you could put the Lava Darts on top of the graveyard pile. Can you alter the order of cards in Modern, or is it because sometimes the order of cards in the graveyard is relevant?
But so
I'm not sure actually.
That's actually a topic that has been discussed before, but in Modern it's actually doesn't really matter because there's, I think, not a single card that really cares about that. I think in Legacy or Vintage it does.
Yeah, Legacy does matter. Yeah.
So there it's a different story, but in Modern it doesn't really matter. You know, when you I mean, just like watch a video where not a video, but watch a dredge player play paper dredge, and you'll see it doesn't matter because their graveyard looks horrendous.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be a real mess, you know, on the battlefield. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So, still speaking about keeping track of those spells in the graveyard, I think it's also pretty important to develop your method, because otherwise, the turn in which you draw a Reveler, you could be like looking at the graveyard and start counting, and then your opponent, they know that you have a Reveler, and this is the information you don't want to really give away, because the fact that you drew it doesn't mean that actually you want to play it straight away. It might not be the good time to play it, so you want to keep it in your hand, but you don't want your opponent to know actually that you drew it. Mm-hmm. And I'm just saying this because I happen to be the one actually was like, okay, can I cast it? And on the other side, you've got a Reveler, right? So you don't want to make that mistake as well, right?
Yeah, that's some Jedi mind games level. But yeah, of course, if you like draw your card and then you take a look at your graveyard and start counting, your opponent will, will notice that, and then I mean, I would be really surprised if my opponent wouldn't guess by then that I have a Reveler in my hand, or that I'm counting for a Reveler. What you could also do is what I actually never did before, but now thinking about it, I think it's a good idea. Doesn't give out any hidden information, I guess, in some sort, is just to put a die on your table, and with that you can track the number of your instant and sorceries, and don't give out like information like I just drew my Reveler or something like that, you know, because your opponent's maybe gonna even notice when you just glimpse in your graveyard and he notices you're counting your spells. So that might be an idea you could go for, especially in the beginning. Just put a die on your battlefield. I mean, not on your battlefield, but somewhere where you can always like take a look at without like moving your head too much. I guess that could be possible.
Okay. Any other tip that you would like to give to beginners or those who are already playing the deck but they want to get better at it?
Oh yes, one more tip is don't mulligan too often, or keep as many hands as possible. I mean, don't keep like obviously bad hands like no lands or all lands, of course, but try to keep as many hands as possible, and try, as I already said, try to get a feeling for what does this hand do, what is this hand capable of, and see for yourself the hard way if this hand works in the future or not, because it always depends on the matchup, on play or draw, you know, and many things can influence the outcome of the game. But yeah, just try to not overthink those hands, because that's what happened to me at least too often. And then I mulliganed hand I should have kept, for example, or kept hands I should have mulliganed. Just try to keep as many hands as possible and try to get a feeling for what works and what not.
Yeah, sometimes you're caught up into this thing, okay, I have to really play the deck the best I can, and you're really like hard on yourself. But actually, the bigger picture is just to learn how to play the deck. So you can actually experiment if you are in a local tournament, FNM, or if you're playing online, but it's not like a league or whatever. You can just try things out to see how it turns out. And then you learn by doing, and it's trial and error. You make the mistakes, but then, okay, this kind of hand doesn't work. Or this kind of hand doesn't work in this particular matchup. You can just write down notes and whatever and just build your experience. I think it's pretty important. And most of the time, you know, your ego gets too big and you don't really somehow learn because you have this obstacle. So it's better just to take it easy, say, okay, I'm not going to win many matches at the beginning, but I want to just try things out and see how it turns out, and then I learn what is right and what is wrong. I totally agree with you on this one. I think it's important not to forget the bigger picture, which is becoming a better player and get to play the deck better.
Wow, I couldn't have said better.
I got inspired by you.
Exactly. One thing I forgot to mention is, a different thing is, like one important interaction in your deck is the ability to shrink down creatures, to shrink creatures with Soulscar Mage. So always be aware of that you can use your lightning bolts, lava darts against bigger creatures or bigger than the amount of damage the card deals to them with a Soulscar Mage on the battlefield, because it's going to shrink them. So yeah, be aware of that. It's a really, really good ability, especially against like Jund decks, big creature decks, Eldrazi-Tron, where you can, for example, Thought-Knot Seer comes into play and trigger on the stack before your opponent can take a look at your hand. You just lightning bolt it, then it's a 1/1 and will probably never attack, for example.
Yeah, pretty important.
Or any lava dart kills it.
Yeah, the creatures like Prowess, you just think about the fact that he's going to get bigger and everything, but the -1/-1 counters count. It's pretty important, yeah.
It's really, really important against Death Shadow, especially against Death Shadow, because sometimes you can maybe sequence your spells as such that when your opponent tries to counter your spell with Stubborn Denial, and if it resolves, the Ferocious ability would trigger and your spell gets countered no matter what. You can maybe sequence your spells as such that you can shrink down the shadow so that Ferocious doesn't really get activated. And that's pretty cool interaction, actually. And then you might be able to pay for your spell, for the counter spell, and then, the tides have turned. So always be aware of that.
Yeah, great. Absolutely great tip. Absolutely. All right, Alex. I think we said it all for this episode. We're going to come up with new videos and talk more about this deck, because I always enjoy talking about Mono-Red Prowess. So thank you very much for joining me here.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me. I'm sorry.
No problem. Absolutely a pleasure. And a big thank you to all of you for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed. If you did, please subscribe to the channel and share this video on Twitter and Facebook, any other platform of your choice. It will help us to keep on doing what we do. All right, everybody. Have a great time casting your favorite spells. And for now, it's goodbye.
Big shout out to Grimflare MTG.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well said, Alex. Goodbye, everybody.